This is very much a Texas thing. You have a hot flour tortilla that has been made with pork lard, and then you put butter on it. Why would you do that? Because it's amazing. Ooh. I used to eat flour tortillas like this when I was a kid, loaded with butter, dripping all over the place. It's the absolute best. It is so good. Look how thin that is. I did a good job. Yay me. That is so good. Hey y'all, I'm Melissa Guerra. I am the Kitchen Wrangler, and sometimes I get a little fancy and I forget to explain the basics. So today we are going to make flour tortillas. I make flour tortillas all the time. I've learned a lot of tricks, and so I'm gonna give you my top 5 tips for making flour tortillas. Number 5, start with white flour. Using traditional white flour to make your first batch of flour tortillas is what I recommend, because I have seen all of those crazy tortillas on the market, like tomato tortillas, spinach, quinoa, oatmeal, rice, almond flour, all of these very different ingredients. I couldn't tell you how to use many of them. There's so many variables. If you want to learn how to make flour tortillas, start with the most traditional recipe, which is white flour, salt, and fat, and a little water. Once you have the basic traditional recipe down, then you can experiment with adding different flours to your traditional mix. There's a lot of fans of whole wheat tortillas. I love them too, but you can't make them with 100% whole wheat flour. You have to mix about half and half of whole wheat with white flour to get a good result. The reason that wheat flour is so important is because flour tortillas rely on the wheat gluten to give them that great chewy texture, that light fluffiness. So you need the wheat gluten to get the result that you're looking for. Once you get into stuff like almond flour, I don't even know what that's gonna do, but you might like the result. I like the traditional ones. Tip number 4, use the right fat. Fat's kind of a bad word these days, isn't it? But you know, you have to have it if you're gonna make flour tortillas. I have talked to a lot of different cooks, and you can use anything from vegetable oil to beef tallow, vegetable shortening, coconut oil, but my favorite, my absolute favorite though, is pork lard, which is the most traditional. If you're a novice at making flour tortillas, try using either vegetable shortening or pork lard for your first batch, because that way you will get some predictable results. Once you're finished with that first batch, then you can move on and experiment with other fats such as coconut oil or even olive oil to see if you like the results. What's really important about the fat that you use is that it's fresh and that it hasn't picked up any off flavors. This is my favorite fat to use for flour tortillas. It's pork lard, and I keep it in the refrigerator to keep it fresher longer. Tip number 3, knead and rest the dough for better rolling and rounder tortillas. Tortilla presses do not work for making a flour tortilla. Remember what we were talking about wheat gluten, that it gives it that chewy, kind of stretchy texture? Well, it's really difficult to press that out in a tortilla press. This is only for corn tortillas, and so make sure that you watch my tutorial on making corn tortillas so you can see how that works. The kneading and the resting part of making flour tortillas is the most critical part of the process. The dough needs to relax for about an hour so that gluten stretchiness kind of calms down a bit, and then the tortillas are easier to roll out. Just make your dough, cover it up, and let it sit on the countertop for about an hour. Or store the dough in the refrigerator and leave it overnight. I'm gonna admit, I've even made tortillas from dough that has been sitting in the refrigerator for about a week. They're pretty good. They're not too bad, but I would use the dough within a couple of days. Also, if you let the dough rest for an hour, then you don't need baking powder. Now, baking powder gives it kind of a cakey, fluffy texture. It's not my preference. You can add a couple of teaspoons of baking powder to your flour mix and see if you like it. But if you roll the dough very thinly, if you've let it relax, the dough is going to puff up with air on its own, and you're not going to need that baking powder after all. Here is an incredibly traditional trick for rolling out round tortillas. When you use your rolling pin to roll out tortillas, remember you are not rolling out the center of the circle of dough, you are rolling out the outer edge. So what home chefs do is they make something called a testal. And a testal is just a small portion of the flour tortilla dough, and the middle of it has been pressed in so that it's very thin. If you're rolling out the outer, thicker ring of the tortilla, then the middle needs to be thin. I know the mechanics of it are a little confusing, but if you try it, you'll see how it works. Once you start applying pressure with your hands to the rolling pin and the flour tortilla testal, you can feel where the edge, that thicker edge, is resisting the pin, and you press down just a little bit in a circular motion. Rolling out a flour tortilla is very different than rolling out, say, a pie crust, because a pie crust, you roll the dough from the center out, but with flour tortillas, you are rolling the outer edges out, and that is how you end up with a round tortilla. Pie crust dough isn't stretchy, and flour tortilla dough is very stretchy. But it'll be less stretchy if you let it sit for at least an hour before rolling out. As you're rolling out your flour tortilla, focus on placing pressure on the outer edges of your dough and not at the center. As you're rolling out your flour tortillas, dust the surface of your rolling space with a little bit of flour so that the tortilla is loose and can move around. You don't want it sticking to the surface because that will absolutely ruin the round shape. Tip number 2, watch your griddle heat. Now, in the world of cooking, this may be a huge shock to novices, but there is no set it and forget it cooking surface. You always have to make sure that the temperature stays stable and level, and that is how you will get a predictable result with any dish. This is a very general statement. So with making tortillas, you have a griddle. I really liked my cast iron griddle. It's the cooking surface of choice for many of the dishes that I make. And even though I have a gas stove that keeps a constant flame on my cast iron griddle, the heat is actually going up and down depending on how hot or cold the raw tortilla is on it, or if some wind blows by, or there's just all sorts of variables, but that surface is actually going up and down and up and down. So you have to keep an eye on your tortilla in order to see if it's the right temperature for making the perfect tortilla. You may think that using an electric griddle with a thermostat would be the way to go, and actually it's not, because those electric thermostats, they go on and off and on and off and on and off to keep the temperature stable. So your best bet is to have a constant temperature with either a stove that has an electric coil that stays on or a gas flame. Either one of those heating elements will give you a much more stable heat source. Before I use my cast iron griddle, I season it with a little bit of vegetable oil and it'll smoke a little bit. And then I simply place the uncooked tortilla on the griddle. It's a lot easier to roll out all of your tortillas at the same time and have them ready to go onto the hot griddle. That way you keep your griddle temperature stable. By rolling out your tortillas all at the same time, you get out of the kitchen a lot faster too. Always use a spatula when you are making flour tortillas, because don't forget, if you get burnt with the steam of a flour tortilla, it always has some really hot grease in there too. I am speaking from a wealth of experience. I have been burned so many times. My top tip for making flour tortillas is practice. Oh yes, so many years of practice. I have burnt so many tortillas. I've made some horribly shaped tortillas. I've made things that looked like a carpet. I've made other ones that looked like an onion skin. I have made all sorts of disasters with tortillas. Ultimately, we ate them or we composted them. The good news is that the ingredients for making flour tortillas is very inexpensive. So you can have a Saturday project for learning how to make them, teach yourself, and in time you will find you'll get it right. And if you don't, you can still eat them. They're pretty good. They're kind of hard to mess up. If you can compost them, it's still a win. Don't kid yourself. Making flour tortillas is really challenging, but it's a fun task for a Saturday afternoon when you don't have anything else going on, and in time, you will get better. So those are my top 5 tips for making the perfect flour tortilla. If you have any questions, please message me at help@kitchenwrangler.com, or you can message me through Instagram, Facebook, or here on YouTube. I'm always here to answer your questions. And you can check out my recipe on my website, which is www.kitchenwrangler.com. I'm Melissa Guerra. I am the Kitchen Wrangler, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here at the ranch again soon. Bye now.